As the soft light of a late April sunrise warms the fields of rural Montana, an unexpected scene unfolds behind the sturdy walls of an old red barn. The familiar scent of aged wood blends with the soothing sounds of early morning, creating a tranquil backdrop for an astonishing event. Tom Wilkins, a farmer who has dedicated his life to these lands for generations, feels a mix of amazement and uncertainty as he witnesses something that defies nature's usual order. Inside his weathered barn, a peregrine falcon stands guard. But this isn't just any falcon. Beneath her wings lie 3 tiny bobcat cubs, vulnerable and orphaned, yet safe in her embrace. It's hard to believe that a creature known for its hunting prowess would take on the role of a caregiver to what could easily be seen as prey. Why would the falcon choose to protect these cubs instead of viewing them as a meal? The events that follow challenge what scientists understand about animal behavior and leave wildlife experts astonished. This is a story of an unexpected family that broke the norms of the wild and prompted many to rethink their assumptions. Before we dive deeper, take a moment to like this video and subscribe to our channel. Don't forget to click the notification bell so you stay updated on our latest stories. On that sunny April morning, Tom's farm was bathed in long shadows as he went about his usual routine. At 67, he has spent most of his life on this land, which has been passed down through 3 generations of Wilkins men. They have all worked this soil, raised cattle in the pastures, and faced both literal and figurative storms. But what Tom discovered that morning took him completely by surprise. It all began with unusual sounds coming from the hayloft, high-pitched mewing that was unfamiliar to him. Despite the discomfort in his arthritic knees, Tom climbed the wooden ladder, his curiosity driving him onward. What he saw left him speechless. Nestled in a corner of the hayloft, hidden behind stacks of hay bales, was the female peregrine falcon, easily recognizable with her slate blue back and sharp yellow eyes. But it was the 3 tiny spotted bobcat cubs, no more than 2 weeks old and barely able to open their eyes, huddled against her body that truly took his breath away. Surprisingly, the falcon was not attacking them, she was protecting them. As Tom approached, he spotted the falcon gently grooming the tiny bobcat cubs. The bird puffed out her wings, creating a protective barrier around the little ones, her sharp gaze fixed on him with a clear warning. "Well, I'll be damned," Tom whispered, slowly backing away. He understood enough about wildlife to realize how extraordinary and, frankly, impossible this scene was. Falcons are predatory birds, while bobcats are predators of a different sort. According to nature's rules, they should be enemies, not whatever this remarkable situation was turning out to be. Carefully stepping down the ladder, Tom's weathered hands shook slightly. He recognized that he was witnessing something well beyond his usual encounters. He needed someone with expertise to help him make sense of this unlikely pairing. That's where Mark Bennett came in. For nearly 15 years, Mark had worked as a wildlife rehabilitator in Gallatin County, Montana. His passion for helping injured and orphaned animals had only deepened over time. Mark's small rehabilitation center, situated at the town's edge, had taken care of everything from orphaned bear cubs to injured golden eagles. As a result, he had earned a solid reputation for successfully rehabilitating wildlife and releasing them back into their natural homes. When his phone rang that morning, he was busy preparing formula for a group of orphaned raccoons. "Bennett Wildlife Rehab," he answered, the phone tucked between his ear and shoulder. "Mark, it's Tom Wilkins." The farmer's voice sounded different, almost shaky. "I've got something out at my place that you need to see. I can't really explain it." Mark knew Tom well. He was a steady, practical man not prone to exaggeration. The uncertainty in Tom's tone immediately grabbed Mark's attention. 20 minutes later, Mark's old pickup truck jostled down the dirt road leading to the Wilkins farm. Tom awaited him by the barn, his weather-beaten face etched with both concern and wonder. "Thanks for coming so quickly," Tom said, extending his calloused hand. "It's up in the loft. I've been watching from a distance. I didn't want to disturb them." "What exactly are we looking at?" Mark inquired while retrieving his equipment bag from the truck bed. Tom rubbed his chin thoughtfully. "A female peregrine falcon, I think, and 3 tiny bobcat cubs." Mark paused, processing this. "You mean the falcon is hunting the cubs?" "No," Tom shook his head emphatically. She's caring for them like they're her own. I've never seen anything like it in all my years." Mark raised his eyebrows, incredulous. "That's highly unusual." As they approached the barn, their footsteps were soft against the packed earth floor. The air inside was cool and filled with the familiar scent of hay and old wood. Mark followed Tom to the ladder, his mind racing with various possible explanations, none of which seemed quite right. "I'll go up first," he whispered. "Just hang back a bit so we don't startle them." With careful movements, Mark climbed the ladder, trying to minimize any noise. When he reached the loft, he paused to let his eyes adjust to the different light filtering in through the small windows. That's when he spotted them, just as Tom had described. A female peregrine falcon was perched protectively beside 3 tiny bobcat cubs. The cubs were so small that their eyes had just started to open, and their spotted fur was still soft and downy. It was clear they were only about 2 weeks old. What struck Mark most was the falcon's behavior. She was nurturing the cubs, using her beak to gently groom one of them, much like a mother bobcat would. As he watched, holding his breath, one of the cubs made a weak noise. The falcon responded with a gentle trill, a sound far removed from her usual hunting screech. Carefully, Mark took out his camera, capturing the scene with the steady hands of someone familiar with wild animals. The falcon eyed him cautiously, but did not leave her cubs, which was remarkable. Typically, wild peregrines are fiercely territorial and would usually flee from human presence. After several minutes of quiet observation, Mark climbed down to where Tom was waiting. "So, what did you see?" the farmer asked, his weathered face full of anticipation. Mark shook his head in disbelief. "It's just as you described. I've never seen anything like this in my entire career. Those cubs are orphans, no doubt about it, but somehow this falcon has adopted them." He quickly scrolled through the photos on his camera. "This goes against everything we know about both species." "What should we do now?" Tom asked. Mark thought for a moment. "First, we need to find out what happened to the mother bobcat. This young would never be abandoned willingly." He glanced back toward the loft. "Second, we need to determine if these cubs can survive under the falcon's care. Their nutritional needs are very different." Just then, a shadow swept past the barn door, and both men turned to see the falcon swooping in, a small rabbit clutched in her talons. As the falcon vanished into the loft, she began feeding the bobcat cubs. Tom watched closely, but Mark expressed his doubts. "Bobcat cubs that young can't tear apart their prey on their own, and falcons don't regurgitate food like some other birds," he pointed out. Moments later, they heard a familiar sound. The falcon was tearing a rabbit into small, manageable pieces. Mark carefully climbed the ladder, leaning over just enough to see. What he witnessed amazed him. The falcon was methodically shredding the meat into tiny strips and placing them in front of each cub's mouth. Despite their clumsy attempts, the cubs were eager to eat. Mark quickly took more photos, already thinking about the email he would send to Dr. Eleanor Langston at Montana State University. He believed she could help explain this unusual behavior. With her expertise in raven cognition and adaptive behaviors, she was a well-respected figure in wildlife biology. The next morning, Dr. Langston arrived at Wilkins farm in her university SUV, which was filled with various equipment. At 58, she carried the aura of someone who had spent a lifetime in the outdoors. Her skin was sun-kissed and lined from years of field work. Her gray-streaked hair was tied back in a practical ponytail, yet her eyes sparkled with the curiosity that had propelled her successful career studying avian behavior. "This better be good, Mark," she said, accepting a case of monitoring equipment. "I canceled 2 faculty meetings for this." Mark grinned, confident that he had something noteworthy to share. "Trust me, Eleanor, in 30 years, you'll still be talking about what's in that barn." Tom joined them and offered Eleanor a firm handshake. "Dr. Langston, we appreciate you coming all this way." "Please call me Eleanor," she replied. "Now let's see this miracle Mark has been raving about." Inside the barn, Mark shared his observations from the previous day. "I've been calling her Aurora," he admitted sheepishly, paying homage to the Roman goddess of dawn, which seemed fitting. Eleanor nodded thoughtfully, her mind already racing with the scientific implications. "If what you're describing is accurate, we're observing behavior that challenges everything we know about interactions between different species. especially predators. "See for yourself," Mark said, motioning toward the ladder. With careful movements, Eleanor climbed up to the hayloft, followed by Mark and Tom at a respectful distance. When Mark returned to the barn, he found that things had changed since his last visit. The falcon named Aurora had arranged the hay into a cozy nest-like shape, creating a shallow space where 3 young bobcat cubs were now resting. She stood nearby, alert but not scared of the humans observing her. Eleanor lifted her binoculars, visibly surprised. "Extraordinary," she said softly. Aurora positioned herself protectively between the humans and the cubs, displaying clear protective behavior. Aurora watched her cubs carefully, occasionally making low sounds that seemed to calm the restless little ones. Tom, watching closely, whispered, "How is this possible? Don't falcons and bobcats usually see each other as threats?" Eleanor lowered her binoculars, considering her response. While adult bobcats and falcons might view each other as rivals, she explained that these cubs were likely too young for Aurora to see them as bobcats. Something has triggered her maternal instincts, but what? Mark pressed for answers, prompting Eleanor to shake her head. "That's the mystery we need to explore." She then turned to Tom. "Mr. Wilkins, would you let us set up some non-invasive monitoring equipment? Just cameras and maybe a microphone. I'd like to observe this behavior continuously." Tom agreed without hesitation, saying, "Do whatever you need to. My barn is your barn." In the following hours, Eleanor and Mark carefully placed discreet cameras around the barn, always keeping a respectful distance from Aurora and her unusual family. As they worked, Eleanor shared her thoughts. "Peregrine falcons are incredibly smart and adaptable, which is why they can live in urban areas around the world. But this," she said, glancing back at Aurora, "suggests a level of behavioral flexibility we haven't seen before. Could she have lost her own chicks? That might explain her maternal behavior." Mark nodded in agreement. "It's possible. We should check for abandoned peregrine nests nearby." She noted this down but added, "Still, that doesn't answer why she's not treating these cubs as prey." By late afternoon, their monitoring setup was ready, providing live video feeds to Eleanor's laptop, which was stationed in Tom's kitchen. The 3 of them huddled close to the screen, captivated by Aurora as she carefully groomed each cub in succession. "Look at that," Eleanor pointed out. "She's using her beak just like a cat's tongue would, mimicking a technique they would expect from their real mother." The realization was profound. This wasn't just a case of unusual behavior. It highlighted an extraordinary ability to adapt, showing a form of nurturing across different species that went beyond what scientists typically understood about wildlife. Tom, curious about the next step, asked, "But what about feeding? Those little ones need meat and plenty of it." Just then, the camera caught Aurora on high alert. She turned her head towards the upper window of the barn, and with a powerful flap of her wings, she took off. "She's going hunting!" Eleanor exclaimed, her excitement evident. "Let's see what she brings back." They didn't have to wait long. Within 20 minutes, Aurora returned with a ground squirrel in her grasp. The cameras focused on her as she prepared the meal, using her sharp beak and talons to skin and break down the animal into small, manageable pieces for her cubs. "She's adjusting her feeding behavior," Eleanor commented, momentarily lost in awe. Falcons usually tear off chunks for themselves, yet here she was, making food specifically for cubs with different needs. What happened next was even more surprising. As the cubs awkwardly feasted on the prepared meat, Aurora emitted a series of soft vocal sounds, distinct from typical falcon calls. To their astonishment, the cubs seemed to respond, orienting themselves towards her. "She's creating a way to communicate with them," Eleanor whispered, her eyes wide with wonder. "This challenges everything we know about interactions between species." Over the next 2 weeks, Tom's barn transformed into an impromptu research hub. Eleanor, overwhelmed with excitement at what she called the opportunity of a lifetime, took emergency leave from her university duties. Mark split his time between his rehabilitation center and the farm, while Tom found himself welcoming not only wildlife but also an increasing number of researchers. Initially skeptical of the situation, many left the barn fully converted by the miracle of Aurora and her cubs. The research team even named the 3 bobcat cubs Maple, Sage, and Rusty, with Maple reflecting her reddish-brown fur. Sage had thoughtful green eyes, while Rusty stood out with his rust-colored markings around his ears. As days went by, their eyes opened fully, and they started exploring their new world with more confidence. Aurora's care for them adapted as well. Camera footage captured her teaching them skills, like how to clean their paws by demonstrating with her own movements. She also showed them how to remain quiet when potential threats were near, and even led them in basic hunting practice, using feathers and small sticks that she brought to their nest. Eleanor, during an informal talk with her colleagues in Tom's living room, pointed out that Aurora wasn't merely caring for the cubs, she was teaching them to be hunters. This involved adapting Falcon hunting techniques to fit their feline skills. The scientists were particularly surprised to observe what seemed to be a complex communication system between Aurora and each cub. She developed unique calls for Sage, Maple, and Rusty, each distinguished by different sounds. In response, the cubs began vocalizing back, creating what felt like a special interspecies language. Dr. Harmon Reyes, a linguist focused on animal communication, noted that they were witnessing the beginnings of a cross-species dialect. Aurora was crafting a unique pigeon language that mixed falcon calls with adaptations familiar to bobcat cubs. For Tom Wilkins, whose quiet farm life had been transformed by this strange phenomenon, the experience brought unexpected joy. Each evening, after the researchers had gone to their tents or returned to town, he would sneak up to the loft, finding a quiet corner to watch Aurora and her unusual family. "You're something special, girl," he would say softly to the falcon. "I don't quite understand what you're doing or why, but it's something wonderful all the same." Aurora, accustomed to Tom's presence, would sometimes nod her head gently at him before getting back to her maternal duties. As April turned into May, the cubs grew quickly, their bodies changing from helpless infants to small hunters. They played together in the hay, pouncing and wrestling, which helped them build the coordination and strength necessary for survival. Aurora supervised these playful activities with a sense of what could only be described as everlasting pride. There were times when the play between the young Bobcats and their foster mother Aurora got a bit too rough, prompting Mark to step in. But amidst the playful chaos, a sad mystery lingered. What had happened to the cubs' biological mother? Mark organized teams to search the nearby woods and fields. Eventually, they found the remains of an adult female bobcat about half a mile from Tom's property. It appeared she had been struck by a vehicle, likely while trying to move her young from one den to another. Remarkably, the cubs survived the ordeal and found refuge in the barn where Aurora discovered them. Eleanor noted that this fortunate turn of events happened at just the right time, coinciding with her own motherly instincts kicking in. Dr. Rees echoed this sentiment, acknowledging that it was a perfect storm of circumstances. However, there was an unspoken concern among the researchers. What would happen once the cubs grew too large for Aurora to care for them? By mid-May, each cub was nearly the same size as Aurora. Yet they still followed her lead, responding to her calls. As the days passed, a plan began to take shape. In late May, Aurora started what Eleanor referred to as independence training. Camera footage captured the falcon leading her now more agile cubs to the edge of the barn, demonstrating how to navigate the descent to the barn floor. Initially hesitant, the cubs quickly learned to climb down, their natural agility serving them well. Once they reached the barn floor, Aurora broadened their horizons, guiding them outside during the tranquil hours before dawn, while the researchers were still asleep. Mark, who had started sleeping in his truck nearby to keep an eye on nighttime activities, described how Aurora led them across the barnyard like a diligent teacher. When one cub, Rusty, wandered too far into the open field, she swooped down to gently guide him back to safety. By early June, these outings expanded, with Aurora teaching the cubs essential survival skills. She showed them how to use hay bales and fence posts as vantage points and demonstrated stalking techniques suited for ground hunters. While she continued to provide them with food, she also encouraged them to attempt hunting on their own. What stood out most was Aurora's keen understanding of her cubs' unique traits and abilities. She never pressured them to fly or to engage in behavior typical for falcons. instead focusing on helping them thrive in their own way. Instead of simply relying on instinct, Aurora seemed to grasp the unique nature of the young bobcats and adjusted her guidance to fit their needs. Eleanor, during a talk with her colleagues who had come from as far as California, described Aurora's approach as a blend of Falcon instincts and an intuitive feel for feline requirements. It's almost as if Aurora was saying, "You may not be like me, but I understand what you need to thrive." As June went on, small shifts became noticeable in the relationship between Aurora and her now nearly adult cubs. While they still heeded her calls, the young bobcats started to assert their independence, sometimes spending hours outside without her oversight. Aurora, recognizing this natural progression, adjusted her behavior too. She reduced her watchful presence, but continued to check in on them, preparing them for independence, just as a biological mother would. The scientific community quickly took an interest in this unusual case, extending far beyond Montana. National Geographic even sent a photography team, while several major universities sought research opportunities. Initially overwhelmed by the attention, Tom Wilkins managed the influx with surprising ease, even creating a cozy spot for visitors to enjoy coffee and his sister Mary's homemade muffins. "I never thought my old barn would become famous," he joked one evening, watching as Aurora led her cubs back from an outing. "But it's nice for people to see this. It really shifts your perspective on animal capabilities." Mark nodded in agreement, noting that his years as a rehabilitator had revealed the intricate complexities of wildlife. Yet, even he couldn't have anticipated the depth of this cross-species family dynamic. By mid-June, Eleanor's team had gathered enough information for preliminary papers, though they acknowledged that a comprehensive analysis would take years. What they could determine so far was quite significant. Aurora's behavior showcased a level of cognitive flexibility and empathy between species that had never been documented before. "She's not just following her instincts," Eleanor explained to her team. "She's solving problems, adapting, and making deliberate choices about raising the young of a different species. She's even developed different calls to warn them about changing weather, one for incoming rain and another for strong winds." At 5 months old, the cubs had grown into healthy young bobcats, displaying their natural instincts despite their unique upbringing. They were able to hunt small prey on their own, showed caution around potential dangers, and exhibited typical signs of bobcat development. However, there was one notable difference. They maintained a strong bond with their falcon mother, Aurora. This bond was put to the test in late June, when a summer thunderstorm swept across the farm with unexpected intensity. Lightning struck a nearby tree, and the thunder sent Aurora into protective mode. Security footage captured her herding the cubs into the farthest corner of the hayloft, spreading her wings over them and making soothing vocalizations as the storm raged on. Remarkably, even though the cubs were now much larger, she took risks to keep them safe, demonstrating her commitment to their well-being over her own instincts for self-preservation. As June transitioned into July, the research team began discussing the cubs' future. At 6 months old, they were nearing the age when bobcats typically start to establish their own territories. "We need to prepare for their eventual separation," Eleanor warned, emphasizing that it's simply part of the natural cycle for bobcats. What surprised everyone was that Aurora would facilitate this transition herself. In early July, she began taking the cubs on longer excursions that sometimes lasted all day. During these outings, she led them to the edges of Tom's property and beyond. With GPS trackers attached to lightweight collars, the cubs explored the surrounding wilderness under Aurora's watchful eye. She seemed to be teaching them about potential territories, helping them understand where they could eventually claim their own ranges. What was truly remarkable was Aurora's understanding of the differences in social structures between falcons and bobcats. Instead of pushing the cubs to leave unexpectedly, like many animal parents might, she managed a gentle transition. Each night, she would bring them back to the barn after a day of exploration. By mid-July, the dynamic had evolved further. The now confident cubs sometimes chose to stay out in the field overnight, returning to the barn the next day. Aurora adapted to this change, showing just how attuned she was to their growing independence. On a warm morning in late July, Tom climbed up to the hayloft, expecting to find the familiar sight of the cubs. However, only Aurora was there, and the cubs were nowhere to be seen. Concerned, he quickly called Mark to share the news that they hadn't returned the night before. "Do you think something happened to them?" he asked. Mark arrived within the hour, and soon Eleanor joined them. The trio checked the GPS tracking data, which surprisingly showed all three cubs alive and well, spread out across the wilderness as they began to establish their own territories. "This is normal and healthy behavior for young bobcats," Eleanor explained. Yet, Aurora's reaction was unexpected. Instead of leaving the hayloft now that the cubs were gone, she stayed put, tending to the nest and regularly bringing small prey, as if she were still caring for them. "She's not ready to accept they're gone," Mark noted as he watched Aurora fluff the fresh hay in the nest. 2 days later, an unexpected event brought hope. Maple returned to the barn, approaching cautiously but responding eagerly to Aurora's welcoming calls. In a joyful reunion, the Falcon delivered food, groomed the young bobcat, and spent the night nestled beside her. Though Maple left again the next morning, she returned 3 days later, but this time, Rusty accompanied her. Only Sage remained fully independent, showing strong signs of her maturity with a GPS tracker indicating she was settled nearly 2 miles from the farm. Eleanor observed, noting how the cubs were treating the barn like a home base, returning periodically while they established their independence. "It's remarkably similar to how young adults often return to visit their parents," she remarked. Throughout August, the young adults continued this pattern. They ventured out for longer periods, but always found their way back to the barn, where Aurora welcomed them warmly. As their visits became less frequent, the bond they shared remained strong. In early September, an extraordinary moment caught everyone's attention. Sensing a more permanent separation was approaching, Aurora led all three young bobcats to a high meadow near the farm. From their vantage point on the ground, they watched in awe as she performed a series of spectacular aerial maneuvers, a scene that would later be viewed millions of times online. As they observed the mesmerizing flight of the Falcon, Tom remarked quietly, "It's like she's revealing her true self." This moment allowed them to witness the mother bird in all her glory before the young bobcats would chart their own paths. Whether this interpretation was accurate or simply a reflection of our human tendencies to project emotions, one thing was clear: this farewell flight marked a significant change. After that day, the visits from the young bobcats became less frequent, although GPS data confirmed they were flourishing in their new territories. Meanwhile, Aurora stayed at the farm, eventually making a permanent home on a special platform that Eleanor's team had built atop the barn. She continued her hunting routines, but now she either enjoyed her meals alone or, to Tom's amusement, brought the spoils to his porch. "Guess I'm part of her family now too," he joked. By the following spring, long after most of the scientific team had left to analyze their findings and prepare their publications, Aurora surprised everyone once more. She successfully mated with a male falcon and raised a brood of chicks on the nesting platform. Even more astonishing, motion-triggered cameras captured late-night visits from her now adult bobcat foster children. They would approach the barn, communicate with unique calls, and sometimes linger for hours before heading back to their wild homes. Eleanor highlighted this remarkable bond in her groundbreaking paper published in Nature that autumn. She pointed out how this cross-species connection had evolved from a simple necessity into a lasting social relationship, challenging our perceptions of animal intelligence and emotional bonds. For Tom Wilkins, whose serene farm had unwittingly become part of scientific lore, this experience changed how he viewed the animal kingdom. "I used to think animals just acted on instinct," he shared with a documentary crew telling Aurora's story. "Now I see things differently. That falcon chose to love those bobcats. She chose to be their mother when they had no one else. It makes you think about what we've overlooked all this time." Mark Bennett, a wildlife rehabilitator whose work has expanded in new directions since his experience with Aurora and her cubs, captured the essence of this revelation succinctly during a lecture at Montana State University. As we observe the natural world, we sometimes come across surprising behaviors that challenge our understanding. What we found was that the ability for empathy, adaptation, and even love across different species might be more common than we ever thought. Take Aurora, for example. She didn't just care for the baby bobcats, she changed our perception of what is possible in the animal kingdom. This has prompted us to rethink our assumptions about the emotional and cognitive abilities of the creatures we share our planet with. Aurora continued to live at Wilkins' farm for many years, raising several falcon chicks while still maintaining her unique bond with her bobcat fosterlings. Researchers have noted rare reunions between these unlikely companions, each one challenging traditional views of wildlife behavior. In a world often characterized by the harsh realities of survival and competition, Aurora and her bobcats tell a different story, one of unexpected connections and redefined boundaries. Their relationship highlights the incredible power of maternal love, showing how it can transcend the ancient divisions that separate species. For those lucky enough to witness this extraordinary narrative, the takeaway is clear. Nature has an endless capacity to surprise us. All it takes is a willingness to observe with open hearts and minds, allowing us to learn from the world around us.